Today's guest is a former president of the Scottish Society for Psychical Research, or the SSPR. He has a vast wealth of experience covering many aspects of the paranormal and developed a special interest in physical mediumship. Let's give a big KoitCast welcome to Nick Kyle. KoitCast! Hello there, Nick. How are you? Welcome to KoitCast.
Pleased to be here. Thanks for the invite.
No worries, and thank you for coming. You had a good day so far?
Yeah, I've had quite a lazy day, really. I'm just out of my sauna and I'm feeling quite relaxed and keen to talk about topics of shared interest.
Excellent stuff, excellent stuff. I suppose we should jump in and almost give people a grounding. I know I've just done an intro about you, but obviously that's very basic. Can we just start with what brought you into the paranormal theatre, if we want to call it that?
I grew up as a young child in both Glasgow and also in a little village near Glencoe called Ballachulish. And I had psychic experiences, or the way I would put it is I was sensitive to earth energies before I even knew what they were. And as I grew older, I began to read a lot on UFOs and paranormal, ghostly stories. I was never really into horror, but I loved mystery. And when I went to university, I had more of an inquiring research kind of approach to the same subjects. And I've been showing that interest ever since.
Okay. How long ago was that, if you don't mind me asking?
I've been actively pursuing the paranormal and investigating hauntings and paranormal claims since about 1980.
Excellent. And is that part of this SSPR, the Scottish Society for Psychical Research? When did you join that society?
I joined that when it started in 1987. And for a long time, I was just one of their team of investigators. But when I got the opportunity, following the demise of the founder and president, the late Professor Archie Roy, I got the opportunity to be president. And I did that for 10 years until I retired. And I retired from my day job as a teacher. But I also decided I wanted to see a bit of the world, so I couldn't do that and run the SSPR at the same time. And I've done that and a bit of writing, and I still investigate some cases, but not as many as I used to, because my interests have broadened beyond ghost hunting or ghost busting.
And what was the SSPR's mission statement, so to say? You know, what did they do? You know, what did you do on their behalf?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not reading from the mission statement when I say it was seen as a kind of psychic fire brigade. You know, if people have problems, they've got a phone number, we send out a pair of investigators and we try and learn as we deal with people's haunted experiences. But a little more officially or formally, the mission statement says that we are trying to understand phenomena from a scientific perspective that seems to have something to say about the human condition.
Yeah.
As opposed to mysteries that have got nothing to do with people, you know, like the solar system.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And can you give us a sort of like scenario of a case? I mean, you don't even have to give details if you don't want to, or you can, you know, give details about a specific case. But, you know, how did people contact you? What did you then do? What was the parameters of your investigation? That sort of thing.
Okay. I can refer to one or two cases anonymously, but in general terms, people have an experience that they think is paranormal. Sometimes because of the nature of the experience, they see a ghost or a shadow person. Sometimes they have a premonition, or they knew something and it didn't come to them through their normal senses. And when they contact our society, we were in the telephone book. Now we're available, of course, on the web. We would initially have a telephone conversation, and we have a structured questionnaire approach which tries to get all the factors that have been relevant in previous cases, and the questions build up over time to see if there are any obvious explanations. And some of them are links that are not obvious and are not certain that they're relevant. But for example, the presence of electricity power lines near the house in question, or a running stream or underground water running.
Yeah.
Things that are associated with certain kinds of energies or experiences. But we do try and take a scientific approach, and probably the best word for it is, to be a good psychic investigator, you need to be a good detective. I think there are more skills in this line of work to do with counselling and simple detective work, trying to establish the evidence for the experiences that you've had. And for a long time, I used to think I was investigating the paranormal, but the late John Plowman, who was vice president when I was just learning about this, he said, "You're not investigating the paranormal, Nick. You're investigating people's experiences that are in the past. They may have been very recent, the previous day or something." He said, "But it's very unusual." He said, "And it's never happened with me. When you walk through the door and there's stuff floating in the air or ghosts are standing waiting for you, it tends to be examining people's experiences and trying to help them come to terms with them." And I think probably a psychosocial approach, you're partly psychologist, you're partly a social worker, and you're responding to people's thoughts, because sometimes they're confused and frightened. Their feelings about things, especially if they live on their own, and it can sometimes affect their health, because not everybody reports it quickly, and sometimes they try and live with something and they feel unsafe in their own home. But if you can reassure them that very few people actually are harmed in so-called ghost attacks or poltergeist attacks, they tend to be just more upset and distressed rather than call an ambulance kind of thing.
Sure. Well, I imagine obviously media itself has got a lot to blame for that, isn't it? So people watching those hyped films and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a coincidence, more than a coincidence, when big movies come out in which there's an element of demonizing some of the characters, or magic is brought into it and ghosts appear. Sometimes it's for comedy, but when it's not, it does have an impact on people. And I think there's been some research done to show that reported cases rise shortly after the release of relevant blockbusters. And the one that springs to mind is when Close Encounters came out, of the fourth kind, there was a rash of sightings in America after that.
I imagine it's just like that. There's an effect, isn't there? Say you buy a new car and it's a purple Ford Focus or something. You will then see a shed load of purple Ford Focuses, because you're sort of like, it's sitting in your brain. So I imagine that's the similar sort of effect.
Yeah, I mean, a psychologist will tell you, you don't really see the world the way it is. You see the world the way you are. And it's your experiences, your emotional state, your purposes, your motivation, your expectations that determine some of what you see. So the other way, apart from the explanation you've given, if you look at a picture and you get a little camera to show where your eyes are tracking on the picture, you don't take in all the picture at once, although your mind tells you you're seeing all of the picture at once. What's happening is your eyes are darting there, constantly, in order to build up the picture. But if there are elements in the picture that are meaningful to you, you'll look at them more, and you'll ignore other things that you might not even sort of recognize initially. And engaging with an artwork can take some time. But that's not what our minds tell us. Our mind tell us that we see the world the way it is.
Is that what they call an unconscious bias? Is that?
Yeah, I suppose so. Most people aren't even aware of their own biases. But any psychologist or indeed any hypnotist will be able to tell you about the power of autosuggestion. Simply dropping a word into someone's mind gives it a power for subsequent experiences. Darren Brown on television is quite fond of using that idea, and sometimes he backtracks after an apparent magical conjuring trick. He backtracks to show that the key elements of the so-called mind reading were actually presented to the person beforehand on a poster that they walked past, or a conversation topic, and so on. It's really quite, it's sometimes it's marvelous to unravel people's experiences and try and make sense of them, rather than just accept what most people would be aware of, which is the shock of seeing the unknown manifest.
And of your cases then that you've investigated as part of the research society, not that I'm going down this avenue, but what sort of percentage of those cases would be, normally explained? Are we talking a high proportion?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I don't think we've ever put a precise figure on it, but you are talking about 80 to 90% can be explained.
But that 10% is vastly intriguing.
Yes.
Yeah. Could you give me an example of a case, and go literally from the beginning, what they rang up and said, what you went around and did, if you saw anything, what you recorded, some of the best ones for you?
Some of the most paranormal cases.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay. There's lots to choose from. But let me start by giving you a case which is not mine, but was from the late Professor Archie Roy.
Okay.
He published it in one of his books, and it's called the Maxwell Park Ghost. Right. And Maxwell Park is an area in the south side of Glasgow, and it wasn't there. He deliberately gave it a different location within Glasgow so that the family would have a degree of anonymity and be hidden, as it were. But it's known in his book and in general conversation as the Maxwell Park case. So there's a ground floor flat and apartment for your American audience, and there's a first floor level flat. So we'll give the families who live there, we'll give them ground floor and first floor as if it's their names.
Okay.
So the people in the ground floor flat complained to the council, or the housing association, that their upstairs neighbours were antisocial because they were banging at all times of the day and night. Meanwhile, the first floor family complained to the council that their ground floor neighbours were doing exactly the same sort of thing, banging in retaliation, as it were, when they hadn't done anything to deserve it. And it built up, and the police were called, and council officials came out over a number of weeks. Engineers were called to see if there were anything wrong with the gas pipes or air knocking, in the plumbing. They looked at mine workings as a possibility. And after, I think, months of investigation and deteriorating relations between the neighbours, they called the police. The first thing that the police got was protestations of innocence from the first floor family, because some of the noises that the ground floor neighbours were complaining about had happened when the family weren't at home. They were on holiday, or they were out for the day, and so on. And they said, no, it's the downstairs neighbours. They're just blaming us because they probably want to get rid of us or something. And they called out a priest. They may have called out a minister, and still the phenomena continued. It wasn't just very loud knocks, but that was the most annoying aspect of it, because some people felt that it was as if a sledgehammer was being taken to the walls and things would vibrate. And so when the police were called, Archie was phoned, Archie Roy, and he was known to the police sergeant that was in attendance. So Archie Roy is quite fond of telling this bit of the story. If he's listening in just now from the spirit world, I'm sure he will smile, because as he walked up to the block of flats, the police had taken the families out of the flats, and the knocking still continued. They put a policeman on the ground floor, a policeman on the first floor, and when they called the policeman back out because the noise was continuing, the ground floor policeman said, "I really resent my colleague's attitude. He's making fun of all of this. He's obviously jumping up and down on the first floor flat." And meanwhile, the policeman who was up there said, "It's terrible. What were you doing? Were you banging the ceiling with a broom handle or something?" And they each blamed the other. And of course, the noises continued when there was no family in either flat and the police had withdrawn. And Archie arrived, and the police sergeant said, "Archie, thank God you're here." And Archie said, "Why?" He said, "I'm going to have to take my officers off this case. It's been going on too long." He said, they're handing in reports that are unacceptable. And Archie said, what are your police reports saying?" "Oh," he said, "the last one was, I observed the bed heading in a northerly direction." Now, this wasn't a case that was easily solved, but it did seem to be related to a youngish man in the house. I think it was the first floor family. And the phenomena happened most strongly when he was around, but it followed him when he went to live elsewhere as a trial separation. The phenomena followed him. And poltergeist or noisy ghost phenomena, they can be attached to people as well as places. It's sometimes thought to be an energy which is put out of the human body, perhaps during adolescence or pubescence and so on, and or just emotional upset and trauma. And when the young man returned to the family home, the phenomenon returned with him. But it did eventually die down, almost as if maturation dealt with it.
It's weird, isn't it? I've heard that before on some other cases. Now, is it that person is excelling or expending, should I say, energy, and that's what does the knock-in, or is it an attachment to that person of something?
I think if I knew that, I would be earning a fortune. It depends which side of the fence you're on. People who believe in the spirit world, spiritualists, I suppose, they would say that there is an energy and it creates an entry point or a pathway or a doorway where intelligent entities can come into our world, be mischievous, mess about, upset people, occasionally help, and then retreat. And they can come back in if the energy is still present, maybe in subsequent days. But if you're a scientist, you would say, no, it's all up here. And there is a little bit of evidence for telekinesis, or as I prefer to call it, psychokinesis, where the power of the mind is able to affect objects. And it may well be, from a scientific point of view, that what we've got is mental distress exerting a force field outside of the skull. Yeah. And of course, there's evidence for both sides. It's no coincidence, surely, that a large number of people who have, let's say, paranormal or ghostly experiences have other issues in their life, perhaps loneliness or distress or trauma or unresolved problems, anxieties and so on. They also have, and this has been shown in statistical studies, a certain personality attributes, certain characteristics would make people more likely to have a paranormal experience. If, for example, they can tolerate ambiguity or things not being clear cut, then they're more likely to accept that there are experiences to be had that are strange.
Yeah. I haven't
But
thought about
if you want,
Sorry.
if you want an example of a case in which it would be very difficult to say it was not paranormal, I can tell you of a case where a local businessman that is local to his community, a local businessman and his wife were running a business quite successfully. So there weren't stresses and strains, particularly of a financial nature or a business nature. There were 3 young women living, their daughters. One was a graduate and 2 were undergraduates, but again, successful and not causing or having any worries about their university studies.
Mm-hmm.
The father phoned me and asked if I could help him because they were having ghostly phenomena, even when there was no one in the house. Or sometimes when there was no one in the room because the person was out, but the rest of the family were in, they would hear bangings from an empty room and they would go in and pieces of furniture would be thrown around and so on. Not usually in front of them, but knocked over before they opened the door. But the father was quite upset when he phoned me because he said, I am used to being the protector and not just the provider for this family. He said, and I wouldn't tolerate this from any human being. What do you do when you can't see your opponent? How do you defend yourself against an invisible attacker? So the SSPR conducts its visits with a minimum of 2 investigators, 1 male, 1 female. All sorts of reasons for that, but it's about safety and having maximizing your chance of getting on when you engage in conversation.
Okay.
And when we arrived at the house, there were 3 of us on this occasion. My wife came with me. She's also an investigator. We went into a house with 3 levels, and the ground floor entry level was where the lounge was, a reception room. They had a bedroom level upstairs. They had a basement level, and they had converted the attic, so maybe that's even 4 levels, if you like.
Yeah.
So one of the parts of the story was that the basement was getting trashed and really quite badly damaged, and loud noises and so on, and that this had happened repeatedly. So I went down to the basement unaccompanied, and I don't normally see spirit, but I have developed a sensitivity to energy, and I can often tell when there's someone there, even if I can't see them. And I sensed a man standing just a few feet away in the basement. And I said to him, are you the guy that's causing all the trouble here? And he just looked at me. And I said, messing about with things. And he said, me? I'm not doing this. The family are doing this. Look at the state of the place. And he said, look behind you. And the wall had been partly taken down, but not fully taken down. And it hadn't been repaired or refurbished. So there was cement dust, there was wood, there was plaster, and it did look a bit of a mess.
Sure.
And then he drew my attention to piles of laundry on the floor. I think there had been a temporary problem doing the laundry, and they had just let it pile up. And he turned and he said, and no one else I don't think anyone else would have heard this conversation because it was almost as if he spoke telepathically. But he said to me, I would never have tolerated this in my time. And I said, "Ah, are you the gentleman that used to live here before the family arrived?" And I said, "And you'd been here for most of your life?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "And you had at least one servant?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, I can understand you don't like a messy basement, but the simple truth of the matter is, if you were," and I mentioned his occupation, a professional one, I said, "a man like you would not want to be known as the scarer of women." I said, "and a man like you would not wish to be interfering in the private lives of others." I said, "The family bought the house, they own it, they're entitled to live here with their own standards and so on, and happiness." And he turned in a very kind of disdainful way, as if he was angry with what I said, and he walked out a first floor window. Right? I had to check later on to see if there'd been a doorway there, because I didn't realise it was one story up at the back of the house.
Yeah.
So he never came back. They never had any more trouble after that. But I went upstairs to the bedroom. Now, there were 3 young women in 3 bedrooms, plus a bedroom for the parents. What the graduate woman lived in her bedroom, didn't come out of it very often. She was quite independent and didn't believe in any of this stuff.
Even though it was going on around her?
Yes, she refused. She just said, "No, I don't want to give it any attention, any importance. I don't want to be involved. I don't want to get involved in discussions with people who are upset for the wrong reasons." But her 2 sisters, who were undergraduates, they had had phenomena in their bedrooms, not the one who kept herself to herself. I thought that was interesting, because it suggests that attitude makes a difference. But the other 2 had things happen to them, and they sensed a male presence, particularly when they were in their bedrooms alone at night, or getting ready and changed for bed and so on. And sometimes the furniture, as I said earlier, would be turned over and drawers pulled out when there was either no one in the house or certainly no one in that room. Now, the most interesting aspect of this case for me was once when one of the sisters said, "I'm getting a bit scared. I think there's a presence in my bedroom." And the other sister came in and said, "Look, I'll sleep in the room with you tonight." And and then the sheets got pulled back, and the girl who had been frightened was lifted by her ankles into the air, and she was screaming, and her sister leapt on her to hold her down, her head and shoulders down on the pillow, and the parents heard the screams and came in, and and they could see their daughter sort of semi-levitating, as it were, and the other daughter trying to hold her down. And that seemed to end that particular experience. Although the parents said to me, one of the strange things that we noticed is there's a wire with a bulb and a lampshade on it in the centre of the room.
Yeah.
Now, if you hit this accidentally or deliberately, it will initially go in the line, the way you've hit it, and then it will start to form a circle. But when we've noticed this light, sometimes it's been pointing in one corner, and then when it does move, it jumps to another corner.
Oh, wow.
And then to another corner. In other words, it doesn't have that circular movement you would expect.
Yeah.
And they thought that was evidence that there's something strange happening, and they wanted help with it. It took 3 visits to get that aspect of the case sorted, because we repeatedly and respectfully asked the spirit person to move on, but he was having too much fun. So
Isn't that weird?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it depends what you mean when you say it's weird. It's certainly unusual. But if you think about it, there'll be young men in the world nowadays, in their population, who just like to be flirtatious and mischievous and maybe even misogynistic towards young women. And I don't think they change simply because they've left the physical body behind. I think the attitudes, the morals and values that they had, the characteristics on Earth, they carry with them into the next life. Obviously, we would hope they would change with a different perspective of life. But I think sometimes there are male deceased persons who come back to cause trouble.
Is it predominantly males that you're finding when you're talking about spirits causing issues?
Well, yes, because the most troublesome ones are men, I think, male. But a significant number of women do the reporting. So the entity might be male, but actually the clients are often female.
Yeah. Now, is that because they would be a victim, so to speak, of a male? Because that generally is the case. Or are women more emotionally free, therefore could pick up on this more?
I would simply point to churches of any denomination. They're mainly women.
Yeah.
And why is that? It's because women have got highly developed sensitivity, awareness, maybe the kind of spiritual understanding of life suits their highly evolved kind of view of things. Maybe it goes with having domestic and caring responsibilities for child rearing. I don't know. I wouldn't want to say too much about that in case I get accused of being sexist or something.
Yeah, anything these days.
Yeah, but so that story I haven't quite finished with it. Okay. Having persuaded the young male to go, and he did.
Can I just jump in quickly here?
Yeah.
The one that you said was in the basement.
Yeah.
Is that the same entity that was on the other floor, or are we talking two different scenarios?
Two different scenarios.
Okay.
So it was an older man, a very mature man, who was in the basement when I visited, and it was. He also made himself known to one of the other investigators in a very similar way before he left. A younger male, I'm guessing late 20s, maybe early 30s, would have been annoying the females. But there was an attic, and there were children playing up there in spirit children, and they were having a great time throwing things around and jumping on bags of clothes or bedding or something, and just bouncing around and giggling and laughing and so on. And that just unnerved the family. So I went up in my most stern school teacher's voice. I said, "Now come on, children, you need to stop this and move on and whatnot." And they never come back.
That's amazing, isn't it?
When we were interviewing the family, they had been sleeping in their lounge, too afraid sometimes to go to bed at night, except for the one daughter that I mentioned. And when we interviewed them in the same room, the lounge, the mother was speaking, and suddenly she jerked sort of upright in her chair, and then jumped into the air and turned to see who had grabbed her by the back of the neck. And there was no one behind her. And she said, "I've just been, as I was speaking, I was grabbed from behind, as if the person was trying to prevent me from speaking." Now, she's either a good actress or that happened to her, because it was very definite. It wasn't a vague feeling or an impression. And I saw a very, very physical reaction as she sat bolt upright and then jumped up to stand up. So we never charge for this kind of work. I've been doing it for about 30 years. We always promise confidentiality. I don't think I've said anything that would allow anyone to identify the family. And I contacted the family about 5 years later, having heard nothing from them. The arrangement you make is phone us if you need us. If you don't phone, we'll assume that you're doing okay, and we'll help someone else. So we never heard. But a TV company wanted an example of a case where there were lots of witnesses, and quite a lot of evidence that people could talk about, but it hadn't been written about or put onto television. So it was going to be like breaking open a new case, sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And I put the television company in touch with the family and said to the family, it makes no difference to me whether you say yes or no. I am not interested in money, but if it helps your documentary with the, I would take part in it. And the guy phoned me back and said, we've decided not to proceed, Nick, because they wouldn't accept that we had to be kept anonymous. He said they wanted to say, this is the family X living at this address in this town. And he said, and that's not good for my business, but I don't even know if it's good for the value of my house, for everyone to know that's the haunted house in the street. He said, so, and this is the point of this particular remark, he said, ever since you finished your visits, there were 3 visits, he said, we've never had any repetition of any ghostly phenomena anywhere in the house. We feel the house is now back and it's ours, and we've been happy, and that's 5 years have passed. He said, and the reason I even considered doing the documentary was a way to say thank you. He said, how many people would do that? 3 visits, 3 people, that's 9, person hours, and a visit can be 2 hours each. He said, and never take a penny for it, and never break confidentiality, and let us get on with our lives in peace and quiet. He said, I think it's amazing. I wish the whole world knew about the fact that there are people doing this routinely, and they're not seeking publicity.
Right, Nick, so we just had a little break. Let me just ask you some questions about that case you just presented, and then I got one about the one prior as well. So all 3 entities that were in there were gone.
Yep.
I want to get back to the one girl that was not open to it or seemed defensive against it or whatever. Did she have a belief that it was happening, or was she just angry that it was happening? And because that would sort of say possibly her frustration or anger was keeping it at bay, or her belief that it wasn't there was keeping it at bay.
She thought her family members were losing it. She saw it as some sort of emotional hysteria. I was speaking to an acquaintance recently who described it as paranormal contagion. The sense that one person's experience influences someone else's, who then has a ripple effect with someone else and so on. And she saw that, someone in the family had started this up and was continuing it either deliberately, falsely, deceitfully, or, and I think this is what she would say, in a confused state. That they're keeping the stories going and the frights, but they're actually wrong in their explanation that it's demonic or it's an invisible entity and so on. She denied a lot of the things that were happening were paranormal. I don't think she believed in the paranormal, and that was her stance on it. What interested me, and I've seen this repeatedly, is that your attitude, your expectations, your belief system definitely affects the phenomena. So I tease myself sometimes when I'm with people, because I say, I don't know if there's such a thing as a paranormal expert, but if there is an expert, then I'm one in getting rid of the phenomena. Because when I walk through the door, it often stops.
I hope that's not in real life as well. So.
The thing implodes. It no longer manifests. And that's because I am quite skeptical and rigorous in trying to come up with explanations. my attitude is, why look for paranormal explanations when you've not exhausted the normal ones?
Of course. Well, if that's more prevalent, you go for the biggest win, don't you?
Yeah.
Surely.
So, I mean, we do ask questions about how's your mental health, and are you happy, and what tablets are you taking from the doctor, and what are the symptoms, and do you have a social network or support network? And when you ask these questions, you get recurring themes. Let me give you just one very small example so I don't take up too much time. Old lady, round about late November, early December, complained she was being physically attacked by an invisible entity who was stabbing her with what she described as wire. She never saw the wire, but she had little puncture marks on her legs as if she'd been stabbed with a syringe or a needle or something.
Okay.
And she was an old lady, limited mobility, more or less stuck at home. And when I said, who's doing this to you? She said, well, I don't know, but I sometimes see his face in the light. And she used to lie back in her reclining chair and look, and just like that, and she would be looking at the main light for the room. And I think it was causing some visual kind of disturbance and something.
Yeah, sure.
She was seeing faces in the light. I said, well, put the light off and get a lamp. You know, people say to me, I hear whispering in the corner. Well, that's fine. That's where you put your stereo. And turn it up if you still hear the whispers. Shadow people, that's fine. Turn your light so it shines on that area. Because there is a theory that spirit find electric light to be irksome. One communicator said it's as if it's burning us. So we tend to stay away from brightly lit places. But that may or may not actually be true. You know, and that's what one spirit person said to me when I said, why do you seem to prefer shadowy, darker places? And the person said, well, we're actually here, you know, all the time during the day as well. But because it's brightly lit, you can't see us. Our energies are quite low sometimes, and it's not enough to bleed into your visible light spectrum. But having said that, in recent years, there's been more and more phenomena in brightly lit conditions rather than dark seances or, you know, places where there's no light and people are walking about with torches, creating moving shadows, but not realizing it's their own torch.
Yeah. Oh, that is very, very interesting, especially about the one where you said the spirit was saying it was burned by the light. I thought they were light beings, so it's kind of odd, isn't it?
Yeah, I can explain it in this sort of way. Many people say, why do spiritualists like to sit in the dark when they're communicating with spirits? Maybe with a candle or a dim lamp, but essentially they call to the darkness, is anyone there? And that certainly is a traditional view of spiritualist mediums and seances, but it's not really valid so much anymore, because in the work that I've done with mediums, they are now doing it in brighter conditions. But the thinking about it was, spirit have to make a big concerted team effort to make a single flash of light or a single orb, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're in a brightly lit room, you might not see these things because they're very faint.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're in a darkened room, you see it right away because it's the only source of light.
Sure.
So the arguments for and against the dark have been accommodated until recently, I think, by people saying we're developing as a group, so we need to be aware of small things happening. And then when the energy and the link with the spirit communicators happens, then we'll get stronger phenomena. Now, I was fortunate enough to attend experiments in Norfolk in the late 1990s. Quite famous now. It's called the Scole Experiments. Nothing to do with school, but to do with the village of Skool.
Yeah.
Skool. But they had hundreds of light phenomena but it was because they sat in dark conditions. And when I met the organizer for my first visit to this underground basement cellar, I was allowed to check it out for security purposes to start with. I said to him, will we be able to see anything in the dark? And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, the lights will be turned off. And he went, oh, don't worry about that. Spirit will light the room up. And so they did. There were so many lights, self-illuminating lights, zooming around. We could see each other sitting on the other side of the coffee table. It was amazing. And it lasted for 2 hours and 2 separate visits.
It's amazing, in a way, a coincidence you said about that, because, well, it's probably not actually, because I watched another podcast with you on, but I got recommended in my YouTube feed a documentary on the Scole Experiment, and I watched it all yesterday. So I saw all about that. Amazing. And I'll link to that actually in the description of the video.
Was that a television show?
It was, yeah.
Weird or what?
I can't remember what the title was. I thought
William
it was Donald
Shatner?
McIntyre doing it.
I watched William Shatner with Weird or What.
It wasn't him.
It wasn't him.
No.
But it's a terrible examination of the experiments. Really dreadful. But I wouldn't want to give it any more attention. Let's just say it didn't deal with the phenomena at all.
You've got to give credence to things.
There's a full-length documentary, and it's called The Afterlife Communication After. It's a 1.5 hour movie type documentary, and it's quite good because it just presents the evidence rather than develops a big argument on the basis of a small thing.
That's probably the one I watched. It looked like it was an old Channel 4 sort of TV film at the time. I even think it was something I watched at the time live on TV. Yeah, I got one more question about your first example or case you gave to me, and then we'll go on to some other topics. But you said about when that chap who we believed was responsible for the phenomenon went out. Yeah, it didn't happen. When he went back in, it did. If the house in its entirety was demolished and he still stood there, would we hear a knocking, or is it only because there's a physical something to be knocked against that you'd hear it?
That's a good question, and I've never been asked that. Let me tell you what I know from another case, and we'll apply the learning to the situation you just described.
Sure.
Little girl in a shop, spirit girl, likes to sit in one of the upper shelves, likes to play. So she'll throw Smarties.
Good choice on confectionery.
Bucketfuls of Smarties. The shop didn't have that many. They had to be shoveled up afterwards by staff. Okay. She used to get staff to pour Coke over their heads, or she would take money out of the till and put it in the customers' hands or purse just as they were about to pay. All that kind of stuff. You can imagine all the things that she would put dolly mixtures in the licorice all sorts bag without opening it. So I mean, it was a funny case to hear about, but of course very frustrating for people. She could turn the fire alarm on and off, and she could choose who hears it. But that's an interesting one too, because
very much so, yeah.
Not just messing about with the fire alarms. But anyway, the shop was knocked down, demolished. And there were 2 reports went into local police of a little girl sitting in the pile of rubble that had been the shop. The police arrived but never saw anyone. Okay. And the spirit girl had learned to communicate with the staff in the shop and also with the investigators. And she said, what's happened to the staff that used to work here? And they said, oh, you've got to stop visiting them and whatnot. But she said, no, I like, we call him Chris. I like the young man that served behind the till. I'm going to find him. And she did appear to find him, because she then sent the owner of the shop a photograph of her in Spain, in a Spanish village, with a little Spanish dress on, holding a bunch of flowers. And she said, I found, my friend on holiday. So while I was here and there was a flower festival, I thought I would join in.
So you said she sent the photo as
The
an
spirit
report
girl,
or
the
literally
spirit-
posted?
Yeah, the spirit girl had learned to use telephones and computers and operate them sometimes at a distance. She didn't always have to be present. She could think, she would hit the keys and it would work.
That just goes to show you that then these entities, spirits, are not tied to a location. They could be tied to a person.
If you take that situation, and if there's any truth to it, and I certainly think that the people that, or the person that investigated that was the vice president of the SSPR, one of my close colleagues. So I mean, if he says it happened, as far as I'm concerned, it happened.
Sure.
But take that back to the case, the Maxwell Park case. If the flats had been demolished and there were spirit people trying to interfere, they would turn up and see that there was no longer anyone to mess about with, no longer any walls to knock or whatever. So I don't think they would linger for very long. More interesting question is, if on that very spot new houses were built, would they come back? And I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's possible, because we know that some people seem to be haunted, but we know that some places seem to be very active, and we're talking about over many years, sometimes centuries. There are some places that have a reputation. So it's possible that spirit people could come back and come back and come back.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing, this whole topic. I can see why you would be drawn into it, because it's really attractive, isn't it, to think about.
I've got a case that is a private case of mine, but it's quite easy to talk about. And I think it poses a question, and I would like to hear your explanation.
Okay, go for it.
Right, so turn the tables on you a little bit.
All right, yeah, okay.
Okay, so a spirit person materializes in my house. My wife, who sometimes can see spirit, says, "Oh, hello, who are you and why are you here?" And she basically said, "My name's Elizabeth and I'm here for Margaret." Now, when this happens, and it doesn't happen very often, we associate it with bad news. Someone's ill or dying or so on.
Yeah.
But we couldn't think of a Margaret that we knew who was in such a bad way. And then my wife got a call from a lifelong friend saying, "I've just got some bad news about my sister, Mags. She's been told she's got terminal cancer and only weeks or months to live." So we knew Mags. I had met her and shook her hand once, but that's it. And because she was only known to us as Mags, and we had such limited contact, we never thought that would be Margaret. But that's what she was called when she was a girl. She took the name Mags in her work life as an adult and so on. So we asked her, without revealing the circumstances, "What was your mother's name?" And she said, "Elizabeth." And the description of the spirit person my wife saw matched photographs and the description from my wife's friend. So there was a physical match up there. But that's not the intriguing bit of the story. Much later, way after the funeral, weeks after the funeral, my wife decided to share with her friend the experience that she had had, and her friend lived in the south of England. And she basically comes straight up in her car, 8-10 hour drive, arrived at my home unexpectedly. And I she's a friend of my wife's, and to some extent me, really surprised to see you. Why are you here? But you're very welcome, And she said, "I've just been told that my mother appeared to say to your wife, Sarah. I wondered if she might reappear if I came here." And she said, plus I know that you sometimes have medium type experiences, so maybe she'll come through to you. And no sooner had she said that, and I cautioned her, it's not like a telephone line, you can't guarantee anything. I was aware of an energy in my right-hand side that nobody else could see. And I said, Mags, is that you? And no one else could hear the reply, but I did. She said, yes. And I said, okay. So I turned to my wife's friend and said, I might have your sister here. What is it that you would like to know from her? And she said, is she happy wherever she is? Is she in heaven? You know, where is she and is she happy? That was the two questions. So I turned, feeling rather foolish, I turned to the area of the room where I sensed the energy, and I said, Mags, did you hear that? Did you hear those two questions? And she said, yes. I said, what's your answer? She said, well, when I went to the other side, I was met by a group of people that I knew in my life who had died before me. She said, and it was great. There was lots of recognition and love and hugs and kisses and laughter. And she said, it was a really good experience. She said, I'm not in heaven. I'm in a very nice place, a very good place, but it's not perfect. But hey, give me a week or two and I'll see what I can do. Now, I didn't know that Mags was a troubleshooter for a national company, and she would be sent into a branch to turn it around or close it within a week or two. But so this was a comment that my wife's friend would understand, and I was passing it on, but I didn't realize the significance of that. And as if she wasn't in heaven, but she was going to see if she could improve where she was.
Her station, yeah.
And my wife's friend said to me, Nick, I know you wouldn't deliberately try and deceive me in these circumstances. She said, but how do I know it's really my sister? I thought that was a fair question, but I hadn't anticipated it. And I turned to the invisible space and said, did you hear that, Max? She said, yeah. And I said, so what's your answer? And it's important that I give you the precise words. She said, with the tone of a tired teacher trying to explain something for the nth time, tell her when I arrived on the other side, there was a group, a committee, a reception committee, if you like, of people that I had known in my life. And I made them laugh and they made me laugh. You know, I said to them, I'm wearing bright red high heel shoes. Am I allowed to wear these here? And a man said, well, you can if you want, love, but nobody's going to hear you coming. And you know, she chuckled at that. She smiled at that. And I looked across at my wife's friend, and the tears were running down her cheeks. And I said, I'm really sorry to disappoint you. You're asking for proof that it's really her. She's just telling me the same story in a bit more detail. And she shook her head. She said, I put bright red high heels on my sister's feet just before the coffin lid was screwed down. And only the undertaker, me, and one member of the family who was sworn to secrecy in case anyone would disapprove. How did you know that? How did you know to mention that as something that would be evidence it's genuinely my sister? You refer to something that almost nobody on the planet knows. And I have often wondered, how did I know? If you take a spiritualist explanation, it's perfectly obvious. The spirit came through, there was a family emotional bond there, it helped you to be helpful. You didn't understand the significance of the message, but she did, and it was very unusual. I mean, what are the chances that you could pick a grave and the corpse would be wearing bright red high heel shoes?
Well, you wouldn't have done it, would you? It's not impossible. It could be done, but the chances are infinitesimally small.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she's come back since, Mags. to comment on a tree planting ceremony and a memorial kind of service and so on, deteriorating relationships within the family. So she shows an awareness of what has happened in her sister's life now that she's gone to the spirit world. She's looking back, she's seeing things, and she's giving advice. But she's only been through twice, and she's not been through as strongly recently. I thought I had an impression of her a month or two ago, but I think it might have been so weak, it was my mind that was creating a memory.
All right. Now, before we move on to a slightly different angle for this conversation, a question that arises from that last example you gave me, which is that person said they're not in heaven, they're in a nice place, an intermediary, if you will. Mm-hmm. That's also mind-boggling, isn't it? Because is it just one step up to there, or is it loads of different gradation of steps to the place? It throws open loads of questions, like, did she do something wrong in her life to go to this purgatory or whatever? Do you know what I mean? Something you have to then resolve?
Well, purgatory is not a place that I kind of believe in, but I kind of try and respect Catholic beliefs about it. They abandoned limbo because it didn't seem to be right after centuries of belief. I think they might do the same with purgatory eventually. But all I know from my communications, my researches, I tend not to talk about what I've read or seen on the media because that's available to everyone.
Sure.
They go to a non-physical plane of experience. Various things can happen in that place. The idea of a life review, the idea of needing to learn new skills for communication, which is telepathic, or for movement because there's not physicality anymore. Trying to deal with the way they are when they no longer have a body to interfere with how they are.
I see, yeah.
So I know that there's a spirit world which is similar to here in many of the experiences that are there to be offered. I think there's beautiful countryside, scenic views, there are halls of learning, there are the equivalent of hospitals, just to help people who have been damaged recover in the spirit world. But I personally don't believe in the concept of heaven, you know, with cherubs and angels and choirs and harps and so on. So, and nor do I believe in the concept of hell, you know, where you're getting burned alive for eternity and stabbed constantly by demons. And that's a world created by a living God. No, it's...
I don't believe in that either. That's just a religious
thing.
There
are a few commentators out there who push the idea of levels of consciousness, levels of self-realization or actualization. And the crude idea is people go to the level that's right for their level of development. And everybody that they meet is roughly on the same level as them. And if they want to know answers to difficult questions, there are people in higher levels that they can access and they can eventually move on to as they themselves develop and progress. Now, Eastern countries would say that ties in quite neatly with the idea of reincarnation, because in order to progress to the next level, you come back to Earth to learn your lessons, you show that you've learned them, and the lessons are essentially about service to others, about bringing spiritual power into the physical world for good. And I think that's an attractive idea, but the levels idea lacks evidence. It's almost as if we're trying to build a very human spirit world.
I don't suppose you're ever going to get actual evidence for it, are we? Because it exists now for us.
Some people die and come back. It happened locally in a hospital here, where a woman was certified dead by 2 doctors, went to the undertakers, was put into a chiller or freezer cabinet, and when she was brought out the next day, she woke up. So
Slightly cold, but she was all right.
but you'll be familiar maybe with the term near-death experiences, where
Yes.
people, they actually die and the doctors will confirm that they've died, but seconds or minutes later, or sometimes hours later, they come back to life, sometimes because they've been resuscitated, and they're aware of what's been happening during the operation, and sometimes they have a visual perspective which is several feet above the operating table and so on.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of people tell stories to make their near-death experience very special. The kind of light at the end of the tunnel, meeting Jesus and so on. But evidence is more difficult, I think.
I know there's experiments done with doctors in hospitals on NDEs, and they place like signs and things on top of cabinets, don't they? And they have words on it, and then so if someone says they had an NDE, they say, okay, what was written on top of the wardrobe, and then that's sort of almost proof because they were above it.
Although hardly anyone has been able to do that, but you're correct that these are the sorts of experiments and attempts. Most people who have gone through NDEs have a dream-like experience, and unless you've taken part in a lucid dream, you'll know that control is an issue in your dream. So you might not be able to make yourself float up to above the wardrobe sort of thing. You know?
Yeah.
So I'm sympathetic to that one. No, I mean, I can tell your audience, for me, the best evidence for life after death is when people come back with messages. And the messages are such that you're forced to accept the possibility of life continuing, or you're forced to become entrenched in strange arguments about the nature of physical reality. You know, where does consciousness come from? And is it only in the brain? You know, and scientists are saying, oh, string theory, spooky action at a distance, quantum physics, and so on. And some of their theories are really quite bizarre. Everything can be explained by super psi, meaning just accept that human beings have extraordinary sensibilities, powers. Our brains are far more powerful than we know, and that some people can use that power. And I've seen it being used repeatedly. I've seen miracles.
So I wanted to talk about mediumship because in my family it's quite prevalent. My nan was quite a well-known medium in our area, and my brother's training to be a medium at the moment, and my girlfriend she sees spirits. So for those not in the know, I know we've had a long conversation already. Can you explain what mediumship is and the different types, you know, like clairvoyant, clairaudient, and all that sort of shenanigans?
Okay. Most mediums would acknowledge a psychic element to their mediumship. And these things overlap. So psychic abilities are just natural abilities in your senses to sense things that go further than most people. And I'll come back to the different types of mediumship in a moment.
Okay.
But psychic is between me and you, or between people. The information is intuitive and perhaps just natural, a superpower. But a medium who may operate psychically would claim to also make a connection not just with the person, but going up to the spirit world. That's where they get their information from, and they bring it down to give a message to someone. So there's a sort of triangle for mediums that doesn't exist for psychics. Think of psychics as a line between two people with arrows at both ends. Yeah. It's a two-way communication, whereas with mediums, it's a triangle. But mediums say if they see spirit, they're clairvoyant. And it's not just seeing spirit people, it could be seeing situations that they wouldn't normally be able to see with their eyes that maybe later make sense, like knowing what's happened in the room before you arrive at the building sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it's what they see. clairaudience is what they hear. Yeah. And the other senses, clairsentience, for example, is feeling in the body, physical sensations, and being able to pick up information from touching objects such as jewellery. The idea being that when you wear jewellery for a period of time, some of your energy imprints on the object, and that somebody with clairsentience can pick that up. I'm clairsentient, maybe. Right.
Okay.
It could also be deluded, so it has to come down. It has to come down to evidence. If I can provide evidence, like the red shoes and so on, then maybe people should be open-minded. The other senses are to do with smell and taste. These are much more, much less common. But what you'll sometimes get is a spirit person saying, I can see or I can hear such and such. And there's a smell of a bouquet of fragrance that's recognizable or something. But it tends to be much less common than just giving messages based on images, clairvoyance, or repeating whispered conversations or communications, which is clairaudience. So that's how I would describe mediumship, and I'm not wanting to give offence, but I have found most mediums are not as good as they think they are, and the ego seems to interfere with one's effectiveness as a medium.
Yes.
The way it was put to me by a famous medium was, when ego walks in, spirit walk out.
And that makes sense, because then it would be all about you rather than all about the message.
Yeah. But I see repeatedly lots of signs where mediums say, well, it's all about me, and they want money, and they want attention, and they want to be in this podcast or whatever to promote themselves, and they write books and they produce courses, and it's all about, it's not all about money, but it's mainly about money, but it is all about ego for many of them. And then you meet someone who doesn't do any of that, and they can produce miracles in front of your eyes. I've seen a medium put their fingertips on a boy's forehead and take a brain tumour out, but just like a dark jelly. And I followed the family for a few weeks afterwards to get the doctors to confirm that the child must have had their scan records mixed up with another patient, because not only did they not have a tumour, there was no evidence they ever had a tumour. And yet the boy was diagnosed by the same oncologist and told he didn't have long to live, and the mother was distraught and brought the not a child but a young man to see the medium.
Yeah, I don't hear much about that these days, the old psychic surgery, because it used to, for some reason, crop up quite a while ago, where you'd have mediums reaching in and grabbing things from abdominal cavities and such.
Well, just to add a little bit of background to that, the medium was the late Albert Best. He lived in Glasgow. He was very highly regarded by people across the world for his healing abilities as well as his mediumship abilities. And the very first time I ever met him, he gave me stunning advice about my situation, which no one could have known. But in this case, he was an uneducated Irish postman. And when he was asked to heal this young man who was in a wheelchair, he sat down, he closed his eyes, he spoke in fluent German, he stood up, he put his hand out, he touched the young man in the forehead, took the globular mass, is how I call it, shook it in his hands into a bowl of basin of water, and the assistant took it away. He dried his hands with a towel, sat back down, and still with his eyes closed, sat back down, sat for just a few moments, and when he opened them, he claimed to have no knowledge of what had just happened.
That was going to be my question. Did he know?
But he didn't have a shirt sleeve or anything that could have hidden anything. And, we could talk for hours on just his mediumship, because he's helped famous entertainers, famous names, heads of state, government officials, even royalty, and he didn't want to talk about it. And when the police used to seal off the street that it lived in because a dignitary was visiting, they used to think that Albert Best was a drug dealer, because the police would be there with their machine guns on either end of the street, and a man would get out, or a woman, and walk into Albert's little tenement flat. So I have seen mediums who are very effective, and they don't want any of that stuff. They have to be almost dragged into the limelight. And a medium friend of mine who's very gifted said to me, Nick, I'd rather you didn't say what you've seen me do, because the first thing that happens is other mediums get jealous, and they start to a bit of backstabbing and a bit of talk, and don't use him, and he said, and then you get character assassination. He said, and sometimes legal threats. If you say you're a healer in the UK, somebody somewhere will eventually sue you.
Yep. And on top of that, presumably you're going to get overrun with people coming to you for help, which doesn't give you a quality of life, does it? Away from the subject. I was going to go on to the next bit was, if a person is clairvoyant, right, do they always see the spirit, or can it just be a case of they hear them on the odd occasion, or is it always going to see because they are that?
A clairvoyant medium will usually see spirit and situations for their understanding, images. But sometimes they'll also hear a voice, or sometimes they'll also feel someone touching them, or they'll pick up information from one of their other senses as well. So if you're a clairvoyant medium, you will focus on images. If you're clairaudient, you'll focus on listening, and occasionally you'll do both. But most people focus and hone their training and their skills in the area of their gift.
Yeah.
But I thought perhaps your question was going to be, is it constant? Does it happen all the time? And the answer is no.
Oh, yeah.
You can switch it off. Albert once said to me, I found this funny. He said, sometimes I swear at spirit. And I said, why would you do that, Albert? Because they're only here to help. He said, yeah, but if I'm lying in my bed and I want to go to sleep, I don't want them giving me messages. He said, well, if they come in for the last 10 minutes of an exciting TV program or film or something, and they were just getting to the climax of the movie, and they want to come in and stand in front of the TV screen so they can talk to me, he said, that's when they get told in no uncertain terms. But he was such a kind man that I think that he was really just letting me know there are limits to what even he was willing to do.
Well, you have to. Like I said, otherwise there's no quality of life for you aside. Yeah. You have to have that. Here's going to be a question that's going to sound kind of weird, but I hope you get the gist of what I'm aiming for. Are spirits simply living another life, like up here on this plane, living another life exactly the same as this one here? And if that is the case, then why do they interrupt those lives to come here?
There have been occasions in which spirit have said to me, we're actually much closer to you than you might think. You might be pointing to planets in the sky, or you might think we're up in the clouds, or, we're some distance away, but actually we're very close to you. But think of it as a radio station dial. Tiny twitch of a radio station, a radio knob, as it were, will give you a completely different station. But they're very close to each other in the wavelengths, just separated enough not to interfere with each other. So, although I don't think that the spirit world is made up of radio waves, it's a good analogy because they may only be 3 feet away, but we'll never know unless they make the effort, and it's a very big effort. to insert themselves into our densely packed world, and with our half asleep brain not wanting or looking for these experiences, and sometimes they have to shout into our ears and we still don't hear them. And it's just because of the vibration frequency wavelength level, if you like, of where they are compared to where we are in our consciousness. Now, I'm saying that as though I'm sure. I'm really just explaining to you the general theory of how a spiritualist would explain it. I mean, I've spoken to spirit people for many, many hours at length, and they don't all give you the same answers to questions. One said to me, "You seem to think because I've died I know more." He said, "I'm just as clever or just as stupid as what I was when I was on Earth." He said, "And in fact, in some ways, I feel that I've gone back to being a kid again because I need to learn how to negotiate and navigate my way through this world without a body." So it's a, on one occasion, I had a lengthy conversation with a man. I don't want to say who the man was, but he was famous. But see, if I start to talk about famous people, that's the ego coming in. Oh, he's just saying that.
Are we talking this is a dead famous person now?
Yeah. He came in, we had several minutes of conversation. And then he said to me, "Do you have any questions?" And I said, "Yes, I have a friend in Italy whom I named." I said, "And he's dying. Or at least that's my worry, that he's dying. Could you find out if his health is going to recover?" And he said, I see, I've become frozen again.
You have, carry on for a bit. We'll just finish this story off him.
Okay. So he said, "I don't know the answer to your question." He said, "And I need to get in touch with a particular group who work in Italy." So that gave me a clue that there are regional and geographical considerations in the knowledge. Just because you don't have a body doesn't mean to say that you're everywhere, omnipresent, like the concept of God. So when you begin to look at what are the rules in the spirit world, there is a rule of non-interference, right?
Yeah.
They're not allowed to give us shortcuts to what we think would be a state of enlightenment or transfer. They're not allowed to do that. So when they do come into our world, they're very limited in what they're allowed to do. And there are groups that they have to get permission from, and there are powers and authorities in the spirit world that try and control things. But we tend to focus on the extreme kind of stories. I think there's probably quite a lot of spirit work that is not meant to change our lives, but just to help a little bit, to show that affection.
Okay, so we're back from another break, and as you can see, I'm dressed differently, and the reason for that is that we had issues at the last recording, so we've moved over to Zoom to finish this off, and here we go. So I'll just jump in straight into this question then, Nick. If we're from another plane of existence and keep reincarnating here, presumably without any conscious memory, it means that we could be asking the same question over and over again. I mean, is there life after death? And then reincarnation, is there life after death? And it's a sort of weird Groundhog Day. Have you got any thoughts on that? Or the reasonings or anything?
You're right. I think for me personally, the jury's still out as to whether reincarnation is what we think it is. And the reason is not that I would deny the evidence, and even on my bookshelves from really well researched projects. The reason is, if I had said to you 100 years ago that I would be able to sit and show you what's happening on the African savannah live on your from the comfort of your armchair. Of course, they didn't have television then. So I would have seemed as if I was talking magical nonsense. But now, not even 100 years after that imaginary conversation, we can do many of these things, and even more so because of the internet. In other words, the phenomena, the outcome of connecting with other people's thoughts, feelings, and lives is there, but the mechanism is quite different. And I think that perhaps we lack a language for talking about the afterlife and reincarnation, because it's simply not fit for purpose. It's not advanced enough to cope with the nature of reality. Even when I hear physicists talking about it and talking about quantum physics and the fact that we're living in some kind of observed simulation, it gives me a headache and I struggle to understand it. But they don't struggle in the same way because they've developed a language for talking about these aspects of reality. I think reincarnation can best be understood as interconnected consciousnesses, conscious beings, who can make themselves aware of someone else's thoughts, feelings, and life memories without being them. In other words, it's a bit like a cosmic web of consciousness, a bit like the internet web, but on spiritual or non-physical domains. So, yes, you can get evidence, and some of it seems quite striking, but it doesn't mean that the person that perceived that was actually that personality at an earlier point in time. It just means that they have linked their consciousness. Is that in itself remarkable? No, I think the linked consciousness is almost constantly, but we don't deliberately train ourselves to bring ourselves up to a level of awareness as to how much it's happening and how often, how frequently, how many people. Interconnectedness is a theme that we need to explore, I think, in many levels of society. I mean, the physicists, and Einstein was aware of this when he spoke about spooky action at a distance. Scientists can demonstrate that under certain conditions, even a laser beam can be affected miles away from its source of another laser beam coming from the same machine but separated. And there is no lag time in the change going from one laser beam to another. It's instantaneous. And I hear they're now developing it for chemical compounds and molecular structures as well. A kind of teleportation, but it's instant. So even if items are miles apart, there is no observable time lag in one affecting the other. Now, in common understandings, we've got a little bit of this in twins, for example. You know, the idea that if something happens to a twin, it can correspond to something happening with the other twin, even if they're on the other side of the planet. Lots of fascinating case histories about that. But I do think the word consciousness needs to be better understood and explored. And it might account not just for reincarnation, but for most of what we call paranormal or psychic faculties.
Yeah, it's just we lack the tool set now to understand all the phenomena.
Here's a question I would pose to your audience. I'd be delighted if anyone responded with a clear answer. Almost everything I can conceive of, everything I touch, I see, I hear, I experience in my life has a structure. We might call it a biological structure, and certainly probably a physical structure, but everything's got structure.
Okay.
So what's the structure of consciousness? And immediately, even researchers who are devoting their time to it at the moment, they hesitate and they struggle to even attempt an answer. Consciousness is a vehicle for a lot of strange ideas at the moment, but I do think that eventually it'll settle into something that we can depend upon. At the moment, consciousness is what I call a porridge word. In other words, it looks...
A porridge
word.
A porridge word, okay.
It looks substantial, I mean, go to pick it up, it's all over the place.
Yeah, it's a strange one. That's a very good question. And I think even if you come out with the answer, it's electricity, it's light. How do we know that? Though those could just be the roads on which the consciousness travel.
Yeah,
very good question.
I mean, I was meditating yesterday, and I felt a shift in my consciousness. I felt an expansion, heightening, an emotional element. And I was sending healing to some friends and acquaintances. And that doesn't always happen. But I think what was happening is I was making a connection live in real time. I'm not saying I was with them. I'm saying there was something special happening when I was sending the thoughts out. I was getting something back that I don't always. Now, until I can figure out how that works and what it means and how to increase the frequency of that, I won't talk about it very much, except when I'm asked.
Yeah. All this stuff is mind-blowing, seriously. I think it's almost too big for all of us, at this moment in time.
Can I give you an example of where meditation worked for someone in one of my classes?
Of course.
It's a striking example, and it should be thought-provoking for your audience. I'll keep the person anonymous because I haven't seen them for a little while, and I don't have permission to tell this story by identifying them. So, in a meditation class of roughly 8 or 10 people, this would have been about 3 years ago. It was a 12-week course, and one of the evenings was on the subject of distant healing. Can you enter an altered state and influence people or objects, events elsewhere? It was a proposition, not a definite thing to be practiced. So I put up a picture of a woman on the screen. I said nothing about her except she was ill. And she looked quite happy. You could tell it was probably a hospital bed, but that was about it. And I said, what I want you to do is I want you to project your consciousness to where this woman is. Try and heal her in your positive intentions. Lay hands on her in your meditative state if you wish, if it helps. But the reason why I put the photograph up is to make sure that your visualization is very clear, very crisp. And afterwards, I did the usual post-meditation feedback session in which people say what they got out of it. And it can vary. Some people get a lot and others not so much. And this guy came up to me. He'd only been in the class for about 3 months. And he came up very agitated and he said, oh my God, I've just had my first psychic experience. I looked at him and he said, I was there. I was with that woman. But she wasn't alone. And in my head, I thought, okay, is he imagining doctors and nurses or visitors maybe? And I said, tell me what you saw. And he said, well, I didn't just see it, I was there. He said, and there was a young man in his 20s leaning over and whispering something to her to try and comfort her. And he said, what I noticed about him was, apart from describing his short hair and his conservative clothing, he said he had a large, full-length leg brace, metal leg brace on his left leg.
Yeah.
And no one knew, except me in that class, that was my aunt. And her son had committed suicide in his 20s. And he was distinguishable, not least of all because he had a full-length metal leg brace on his left leg.
That's interesting on two fronts then, isn't it? A, because he projected himself there, and then B, he witnessed a spirit there at the same time. That's
what it's suggestive of. And I would say to people, work out the chances. What are the chances that a young man in his 20s wearing a full-length metal leg brace would be your lucky guess?
No one's going to guess that, no.
I would think it would be thousands of one against chance. But, so, I do think there is some evidence that when you go into an altered state and you project your consciousness, it can influence people and events. And another example I would give, which is much easier to quote, is where random number generators have been altered in their randomized functions just by concentrated thought. It's been clocked in seances, where when the mediums say, spirit are here, spirit have just walked into the room, they've arrived or whatever, the machines kind of go haywire. That's not strictly speaking what happens, but they go non-random.
Yeah.
And also where people sit in a group and focus on the machine, they can influence its randomized patterns. So I think consciousness can exist outside of the brain. I think it's a convenient term or concept to explain a lot of the paranormal. But I do think people are still talking an awful lot about things they don't know much about, and I would include myself in that.
Oh yeah, if anyone claims to know everything, I'm always immediately skeptical, because how can you? I think there's so many subjects in life and we've only got such a small brain to lob it all into. Now, you obviously bringing up that example there, it's almost the exact thing that I hear about remote viewing, isn't it? Which is you're projecting your consciousness to a specific set of coordinates or to a person or whatever, and then perceiving what's around you. So that's interesting that it ties in with that. I've
done remote viewing.
Oh, have you?
Did a very short course with Joe McGonigal, and it struck me as just a particular focus for what most mediums and psychics and sensitives do naturally. If you like, it's an American term for what we do at the moment. But what it does do is it helps people to believe that perhaps with training they can do it. And I think Joe McGonigal should be credited for raising people's awareness and encouraging a lot more of it to happen. I've experienced not so much an accurate response to map coordinates, but I've experienced projecting myself into a situation of need and people saying things that would support the idea that I had some influence. Distant healing would be an example.
Have you ever looked to send yourself out to the cosmos in that respect?
Only occasionally as a kind of meditation experiment. Yeah. But one of the teachers that I quite like, who appears on the internet and who teaches meditation very similar to me, a method called self-inquiry, is called Mooj, M-O-O-J or Jai, I. Okay. And if your audience looks them up, what they'll get is a process by which they ask themselves questions to go deeper and deeper. Now, can I practice on you? Just
by all means.
A few seconds, yeah?
Okay. Yeah.
Who are you?
Paul.
No, you're not your name. Your name is the label that people put on you or you choose for yourself. Who are you?
If you want me to describe character traits, yeah, that's almost impossible.
So you would say perhaps your occupation, you would say a role that you have, partner, lover, parent, friend to some sort. These are all role expressions of something that's in you. You are, again, not your role. Your role is what you're aware of acting out as a set of behaviors. So who are you? And people often falter at this point because they know that almost any answer is going to get knocked for six as being external to the real you. So they hesitate and I say, how old are you? And they might say 40. And I'll say, so let me get this right. For roughly 35 years of rational thought, you haven't taken the opportunity to figure out who and what you are. Isn't that remarkable? It's almost like walking blindfolded for your entire life and not knowing that there are colours and textures out there. So what Mooji does is he ends up saying, You are not your thoughts, and you are not your emotions. You are the experiencer or the observer of these. You are the point of awareness, the individuation of consciousness, the point of consciousness which resides within you. Maybe you could label it presence or awareness or individuation of the universal life force. But whatever label you give it, it should not be something your conscious mind can manipulate.
I was going to say, because even I went straight to character points, such as I'm quite comical, I'm a very, very, very deep thinker, that sort of thing, but you're going right back to the pinpoint before all that branches out.
Now, the relevance of this is simply if you can achieve that point of awareness where all else has fallen away, you will feel that you're in the cosmos. You will feel such an expansion and a freedom that for some people, and it's happened to me only once or twice in my life, you get the sense that you know everything. And you don't. You come back to ordinary 3D existence minutes later, usually, maybe hours. And all that falls away like a memory that you can't retrieve, a dream that can't be truly experienced again. But the feeling of expanding your consciousness and seeing that the universe is unfolding as it should, and that everything is in the right place at the right time for all the pathways that are valid or have been chosen. That's like being in the cosmos. It's the closest I've come.
A question on that. If you're going to this point, or nearest damn it you can get, and then you come back, do you think parts of you when you come back are chipped away, i.e. ego and things like, negative traits or whatever, do you think?
No, I don't like the expression chipped away, because that suggests you're left with something missing and that you're less than what you were before. I would say, how are you changed? And the answer is deeply, very deeply. Let me give you an example. You become aware of your thoughts. If you don't live your life with a conscious awareness of your thoughts, then you won't have thoughts. The thoughts will have you. And you will react to your thoughts, and you will be swept away and overwhelmed by some of your thoughts, and similarly for emotions. If you don't live life in conscious awareness of your emotions, you won't have emotions, they will have you, and you will find yourself like some sort of ship in the wind, rudderless. And if you do have a conscious awareness, and I try and live this, but I'm just a beginner, I've only been doing it 20, 30 years. If you live your life like that, you don't react and suffer as much. You're able to choose the best way to respond. And if you're not sure what the best way to respond is, just focus on the concept of love or loving kindness, because that should always characterize your actions for yourself and for others that come into your awareness. I teach this, but it's a lot easier to talk about than it is to do.
I imagine so. I always boil it back, and you said the same word there, which is choice. I keep saying to people, everything is the choice. You make the right one, you're going to send yourself down the right path, that sort of thing. Because I've had times in my life where I've had to do an awful lot of inner reflection, not through meditation, but through just solitude and things happening externally. Now, I've heard from previous KoitCasts that I've done from various people that they believe our pineal glands are calcified, which knocks back our psychic state. I'll ask you the same question I asked them. Do you think we are naturally psychic beings in default state, but through externalities or whatever, we've been hidden within ourselves?
Yes, although I wouldn't put so much focus on the pineal gland. I think that could be a component of how we function. Just as I've been encouraged to believe by science that the brain is not the only source of brain cells. that we have brain cells in our heart, and we have brain cells in our gut. And in fact, famous writers and psychiatrists like Dan Siegel, he says we have a fifth sense. And the fifth sense is our interior. How does it feel? Do you have a feeling in your gut? Do you have butterflies in your chest? Do you feel better, happier, healthier doing this or not? And this interior response is maybe cleverer than our conscious minds, because it gives us a feeling to work on without having to rationalize and process it around.
Yeah, maybe it's tapped into other things that we can't sense.
Yeah.
You know, whether you want to call that magnetics or something else, who knows? It's a lot to explore with the human condition. I got a strange question here, but it came to mind and I thought I was going to ask you, so I will just jump in. So please bear with me on this one because it's kind of weird. I came up with this proposition as part of a potential for a film idea, right? Which is to say, spirits, i.e. us, our consciousness, whatever you want to call it, are we invaders at birth into the human? I.e., if spirits didn't come into the body at birth, would it have grown into a human devoid of spirit, which is its own thing? Does that make sense, that question?
Yeah, but I don't think I can answer it confidently. I would be tempted to say yes, but I would like to work through not just the semantics of what you're saying, but the process by which you can come to that as the best fit or the only conclusion. I've had the misfortune to lose two children round about the time of birth. And I have thought long and hard about when did life begin? Life as opposed to some kind of cellular division. And when the abortion arguments and so on, how other people express these thoughts, but at what point have you got an unborn human being? And I think that relates to what you're thinking about, but I'm not much further forward than most people who have given it some thought. I don't know of any living human being that doesn't have what I understand to be life. You know, it's almost as if you take life away and what's left is just the physicality. You need the life to animate the physicality. But you see, even here, so what is life then? We've already thought about what is consciousness. It's a difficult one. Supposing for those of your listeners, who think, well, it's blooming obvious what life is. That's alive and that's dead. I would say, think again, because scientists would say they don't know where consciousness starts and they don't know where it finishes. I as a child used to feel that stones exhibited energy, and I was once given a crystal from a spiritualist group, and it glowed in the dark about a week later, inexplicably, in pitch dark. You could almost read a newspaper by it. And then the following week, it didn't do that. It only gave off tiny little sparks at the point of the crystal. And the week after that, there was nothing, and there's been nothing in the last 20 years. So how do you explain that? It's called a crystal, but it suggests that there is an energy of which we are unaware, even in the very stones, before we get to plants and animals. For several years, I used to give lectures on the fact that plants are intelligent. And I had lots of evidence, and I was pleased that a former Nobel Prize winner, biologist, had said he reluctantly agreed that plants had many of the characteristics that we use to describe intelligence.
And that's a whole nother topic of conversation that I imagine would literally branch out massively.
But it suggests that even the woodlouse, who turns away from the light or indeed goes towards it, has something called life in it. And we share that something called life.
Mm.
Yeah. But I can't tell you really what it is, Paul. All I know is it exists at many levels, and not all of them are physical.
Another mind-blowing subject. So I'll move on from that one, because I think, like I said, my brain would be there all day thinking about that one. What do you think of spirit boxes, and have you had any experiences with those?
Okay, I'm stifling a laugh, because
okay.
I mean, it's essentially that they're nonsense. Essentially, right? I'm not saying that they cannot be used and interpreted occasionally in a meaningful way, but I wouldn't be recommending anybody goes out and spend money on them. Let me give you another example. There was a group that came to Glasgow, a city near where I live, and they brought an aluminium case into a basement. And when the organizer for the venue, I'll tell you what it was too, it was Central Station in Glasgow Underground. When the person who was in charge of the tour and whatnot said, "Why have you brought that big case?" They said, "Oh, that's to trap spirit." So I would politely suggest that whole group is chucked out for speaking abject nonsense and invited to come back when they know what they're talking about. There is no case like that in the Ghostbuster movies, right? That can trap anything of a spiritual nature. I've seen spirit beings walk through solid walls, doors, windows. It's not a problem for them. One medium who sadly passed on now used to talk about peepers in a main road that he lived on, because he'd be walking along the road, perhaps doing his grocery shopping, and he would see spirit people sticking their heads out through the brick walls into the street, looking up and down, popping back in. It's
a cool image.
Yeah. So the idea of I bought one of these spirit software things quite cheaply a number of years ago, and it only gave me one thought-provoking moment. Other than that, I don't use it, and it was a waste of time. I asked it a question, and it was able to articulate an answer. So I thought, okay, what question can I ask that it would be impressive if they could answer it intelligibly? So I said, "Who am I?" Because I just bought the product. I didn't think it'd be pre-programmed with my name, but I would have been impressed if it had said, "You're Nick Kyle." What it said was, "You're the Glaswegian. You are the Glaswegian." Now, I was born in Glasgow. I grew up in Glasgow. I live within the greater Glasgow conurbation, maybe. So that was impressive. It could have been hoaxed, but I don't think so. I just think it was interesting. But you know what? An acquaintance of mine once said to me, "You already have the best equipment that you can have." He said, "It's between your ears. And before you rush to think it's your mind, no, it's your sensitivity, it's your sensibility, it's your awareness, not just the rational, rather clunky process of logic and reason." So I don't buy equipment for that reason. I only buy video equipment to have a video record. And I know from the number of video clips out in Fuzzyland, they are not considered evidence really very much.
Would you say the same for EVPs, presumably?
I've listened to several hundred EVPs, several hundred, and I would say maybe 6 or so, 10 at the most, have been intelligible and different, unexpectedly different, surprising in some way, because I think you can get EVP from ordinary sources of radio communication, perhaps, in which the language will be ordinary. So it really all comes down to working out the chances that it could happen without paranormality. It could just happen in an everyday sense. And then trying to judge, so how different, how strange is the evidence that you're presenting compared to the laws of chance. Now, as a very good scientist I recommend it, Dean Radin, who's written a book called Real Magic, I'd recommend it to everyone, as a statistical and broad-based scientific approach to paranormality. And what he says is, having done many, many meta-analyses of studies, there's no point in talking about telepathy in terms of proving it exists. We're now at the stage, he said, where we're trying to work out maybe how it works, but it definitely works. And the odds are 6 sigma, he says. In other words, six areas of the paranormal are more than 1 billion to 1 against the laws of chance. And some are even 1 trillion to 1. Now, lots of scientific studies have been accepted on the basis of 1,000 to 1. And they feel that that's enough for them to make further studies and further progress. So paranormal results, which tend to be small, actually have an awful lot of weight behind them, quantitatively, not just qualitatively. And I think his book summarizes it really well. So he says, for example, telepathy exists. No point in trying to argue to the contrary. He said, I've got more evidence than you could collect in a lifetime. So let's just accept it until it exists. Let's study how it exists and how we can magnify it, maybe. And then he goes on to say, and by the way, if you accept that telepathy exists, an awful lot of paranormality can be filed away.
Yeah.
Because it's mind-to-mind connection, even if it's mind-to-alien mind connection.
Right, so quickly back from another break. We'll move on to the UFO topic. What do you think is going on there? And obviously with the revelations from David Grush, the whistleblower, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that unidentified aerial phenomena, the new term for UFOs, it illustrates an awareness that they may not be objects, nuts and bolts, kind of alien aircraft, as it were. They may be some sort of phenomena which might be non-physical. The way in which they enter the water, for example, and don't seem to create the kind of splash that any rocket or submarine might. So for me, it's an umbrella term for lots of different types of phenomena. Okay? I'm about to speak next month in a conference in Manchester. Another thing that I would recommend to your audience, if we can get along the last weekend of August. And I'm going to be drawing a link there between unidentified aerial phenomena in a seance room, which is very similar to what you see up in the sky. The difference, the scale, the difference is size. I can see flying saucer shapes in the sky, and I can see miniaturized versions in a seance. So I'm just looking here for, so I think we could be looking at a variety of phenomena, some physical, metal, tough, big, miles wide, according to reports, and other things that you could hold in your hand, or that would fit into a room. And they may be the same phenomena, just miniaturized for the purposes of the people viewing it. Let me give you an example. Some phenomena experienced by all sorts of researchers, investigators, mediums, psychics, can be quite small.
Yeah.
But in their original form from whence they came, they are understood to be much bigger. Okay? That is why some people think that if you don't normally see angels, for example, because they're 7, 8, 9 feet tall. And when they're in their original form, they need an enormous amount of energy to make themselves clearly seen. If they shrink themselves down to perhaps a foot or so, they shine more brightly because they're concentrated. And that's when their light bleeds into our visible spectrum. And we see a little person, a fairy, or indeed an angel, an orb, something like that.
An orb, yeah. Is that what you think the orbs are?
What do I think they are?
Yeah.
Yep. There's a good book out on orbs which analyses scientifically about 70% or more as easily explained. And then there are those that aren't easily explained, and some, according to the authors, that they simply cannot explain in scientific terms. So, for example, is an orb seen in a camera photograph? Was it seen by witnesses at the scene? In other words, was it actually there, or was it something that showed up on the camera? Yeah. Both could be a sign of spirit, or let's say discarnate intelligence is influencing the camera or the video recorder. Maybe what we should be thinking about is what are the tests for an orb being possibly or probably paranormal? Self-illumination is one. If an orb passes, say, a wall, and you can see the wall lit up as it passes, that's more likely to be something of interest than something that shows up on the camera, but the people who were there didn't see anyway. In my conference speech, I will be presenting the world's best ghost photograph. Now, how do I justify such a claim? Well, a guy that produces Phenomena magazine and can get a million hits agrees. So what makes it the world's best? The ghost is captured in a recognizable form, but not very clearly, in infrared.
Okay.
And if I pause at that point, most people would say, well, if it's a kind of fuzzy, grainy infrared and it's taken in darkness in the middle of the night, there's quite a lot of photographs that might fit that. To which I would say, yes, but this location had security by the property owners, and then an inner ring of security, which was an investigative team, and the cameras were supervised but not touched. Nobody interfered with them. So most of the grainy infrared stuff that you see in television doesn't have that double ring of security. But that's not what makes it the world's best ghost photograph, because there will be some infrared grainy photographs that do have been taken in conditions that are secure. This one has thermal imaging. Right beside the infrared camera, there was a thermal imaging camera focused in the same place, recording in live time, and it showed the same figure bleeding from his arm. That is heat coming from a gash in his arm, consistent with people interpreting it as blood loss. But the point that if the same image exists in a thermal image, it means that it's physically able to emit heat.
Yeah.
That means it's not a visual anomaly, it's a physical anomaly. So how do you explain it in conditions of double security?
Well, yeah, I don't think you can. Has anyone seen this image before, or is this a fresh one to the
It was
public?
taken by a good friend of mine, Michele Di Nicastro, an Italian parapsychologist, and it was taken some years ago in an investigation that he was part of. So it's his photograph, if you like. He's kind of got the copyright on it, and I never refer to it without referring to him. So he was going to release it to the world in America, an American parapsychological convention, but he's never been able to get away from Italy to attend it. So he's keeping it in his folder or whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say an awful lot about it, except what I've told you. It is significant for our discussion just now, because although the soldier is perfectly proportioned, he's about 50% of a normal human being's size. So he's not dwarfish.
Yeah.
It's not dwarfish. He's not a little guy dressed up as a knight of the realm or anything. He looks as if he's simply been scaled
down. Yeah.
And the Michele put an image of himself. He's about 5'8". Beside this, and you could see that Michele was roughly 40%, 50% bigger. And when I said to Michele, I understand why spirit might want to turn up so that we can see them, but why do they shrink themselves? And he smiled and said, because we might not see them otherwise. That ghost has probably been here throughout our visits, but he chose to let us see him by shrinking the energy into a smaller space. Now, if there's any truth to that, it explains an awful lot where people see little fairy figures or elemental spirits or small objects like orbs. They're actually it's something that could be in its original state or form much bigger. Not just
and do you think
50%.
Yeah.
100%.
And do you think, I think this alluded to the conversation we had the other day before we had to change to Zoom, that this entity, person, whomever, wanted to show itself to do what? To give proof of the afterlife, or to give comfort, or?
This was a historical location, which he turned up annually. I think it was round about Easter time, but it might not be Easter, it might be some other month. And hearing that was a pattern that had been identified, the investigative team turned up and spent several days and nights letting the cameras run. And sure enough, he turned up in the location where legend says he would, and he was identified as being dressed in the garb of a medieval soldier with breastplate and protection around the hips and shoulders and so on. I refer to it mainly because it's another example of what spirit have to do to be seen. Let me give you a very different example, which suggests that there are rules that spirit have to follow, which we don't particularly think of. I think we think that when we all die, wherever we go, it's a free-for-all. Yeah? No, I think the reality is there are rules there and tasks and jobs to do there, just as there are in this world. But hopefully it's being a non-physical world, it takes away a lot of the suffering. But anyway, in the Scottish borders, some years ago, a spirit girl was heard to speak routinely. She was in a shop, and she would sit on the top shelf, but no one could see her. So that's where the voice would come from. And she would have extended conversations. I mean, hours of recorded the voice of a little girl talking with the shop staff initially, and then with investigators as well later. Now, one day, when she's twittering away and speaking to the investigators and the shop staff, a man comes in with his little boy, and he's in to buy sweets or something. And the little boy looks up at where the voice is coming from, although the spirit girl has gone quiet. And he looks at his dad, and he looks up, and as the dad is taking him out the door of the shop, he said, "Dad, how did that girl get up there?" And the dad turns and says, "What girl?" "Up there, she's sitting on the top shelf." Father looks up, sees nothing, says, "Don't be so silly, there's no girl on the shelf," and pulls him out and goes away. And then the spirit girl resumes talking, and her words were, "Oh no, how did he manage to see me? I'm not allowed to be seen.
Ooh.
I'm not allowed to show myself. I'm only allowed to speak and have conversations. Now, if there's any truth to that story, and I used to work with the investigator who was present when that took place, I think we need to be aware that there are rules governing spirit contact. And one of the rules might be a policy of non-interference.
Yeah.
So people have to learn their lessons in life for themselves. You can't live anyone else's life for them, and you have to learn your own lessons without it being handed to you in some silver platter.
Yeah.
What is the purpose of life? Should anybody be unclear, I can suggest that from my experience, it is to bring through a discarnate intelligence, which is loving. Most of us call it spiritual. To bring that energy into this physical 3D limited world to be of service to others.
Yeah. Yeah. Another mind-blowing thing. Seriously. I'm going to break out into another one now. We sort of half touched on UFOs. What do you think about Bigfoot? I know that's a complete departure.
Bigfoot,
Yes,
or Sasquatch, or the Yeti, all of these big animals alleged to live around the world are almost certainly interdimensional creatures. Almost certainly. The way in which they appear and disappear, the way in which sometimes there'll be tracks suggesting they've physically manifested, they've materialized, and then disappear in the twinkling of an eye when hunters are experienced and looking for them. That suggests, like UFOs or UAPs, that they come and go, and they're not bound by the physical laws of this world. They have their own trajectories, their own ability to step in, step out. Now, one location which some of your audience might be aware of is Skinwalker Ranch in Utah.
Yeah.
Where creatures appear to step out of a void, a portal, an energy doorway, and sometimes disappear back into it, whether they're in the sky or plodding along on the ground. And I think Sasquatch is that kind of creature. It could be a time anomaly. Could be Sasquatch is a creature from way back in the past stepping into the present, because I believe that is possible. But it's, to me, it's just as likely to be this creature exists in its own land, its own dimensional plane of existence, and sometimes deliberately and often unintentionally, they appear in ours. Their energy just allows them to trip over that, I don't want to call it a wavelength, but to appear in our world and then disappear from it.
Yeah.
So I exist, and I have one or two friends. Joe Stewart up in Michigan has had encounters with Sasquatch, and one other investigator claims that they have visited them in his home, and he's had extended conversations. Now, words are cheap, and it's easy to make these claims. He's not invited anybody into his house when they're having a little conference. So I would put a question mark and use my favourite word, which is maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Skeptics' view would be hold open the door of possibility, but don't let all sorts of rubbish fall through.
Yes, I agree on that one completely. Yeah, I'm of the mind that Bigfoot is real. In what capacity? Who knows? Interestingly, I'm going up to Washington State in a couple of weeks, so maybe I'll see one, because I know we're going to go out hiking a lot. I kind of hope so in a way.
Right. The only thing I can suggest to you, and I haven't gone Sasquatch hunting, I've only spoken to people who choose to do that. What I would say to you is, if Sasquatch are aware of your thoughts, then instead of stumbling about in the dark with a torch and giving woohoo footage for the television, which I don't think you would do anyway, but rather do that, which is the dominant mode of television searches at the moment, I would suggest that you find a quiet spot and that you meditate and send out a message to Bigfoot, which is positive, respectful, encouraging, and genuinely wanting two-way communication with a clear message that there is nothing to fear from you. And I think Sasquatch will come to you.
Have there been experiments on that basis by anyone else, do you know?
I think it's a bit of a mixed bag, to be honest. People use hunting skills and claim to come across tracks, and they do plaster casts and so on. But there's other people who go in and sit and meditate, perhaps near where they think the Sasquatch have built a nest or something. And both claim successes, but both are basically unable to provide hard evidence. Joe Stewart spoke to me earlier this year and showed me some photographs of signs that Sasquatch has left. If you like, if I gave you a bundle of sticks and said be creative, that you would maybe make arrows and little boxes, and so that's the kind of thing that Sasquatch are able to do. So you meditate, you leave, you return to that location, and there's something new there, and it contains a kind of a message, something that can be interpreted. And Joe Stewart has begun to compile a list of twigs in certain positions symbolize and mean this. And the messages all appear to be friendly, just the occasional warning to stay away.
Joe Stewart, I will look that person up because I'm interested on that one. Definitely.
He's perhaps better known for being a demonologist. So if you're looking for him, put Joe Stewart, Michigan demonologist, and if you're in difficulty, contact me, because I'm in regular contact with him for most of the year, but not during the summer months.
Sure. Well, yeah, if you could help hook up one, because I actually said to my girlfriend's mother that was a person that I wanted to be interviewing at some stage, would be someone who deals with Bigfoot. The names I found so far.
Joe is very convincing. He's modest, he's self-effacing, and he only speaks truthfully. And he'll often say, I don't know the answer to that, because he doesn't, rather than what I would suggest many people do, which is to pretend they know more than they do.
Yes, and that's a big thing of mine as well. You say, I don't know, if you genuinely don't know. And it's a big green flag when someone does that. Let's branch out away from the paranormal now. And I'm going to ask you a question that I've asked every single one that I've interviewed.
Just before you pose the question, can I just say that Nessie is probably in the same category? The Loch Ness Monster. Right. It may be an interdimensional creature. It comes and goes.
That's an interesting one.
Yeah. For exactly the same reasons. Nessie can appear and disappear, and nobody knows where it's gone to, and radar traces don't normally show anything, and then she pops up the very next day, sort of thing.
And do you think that's the same for all the other cryptozoological things like Dogman or whatever else? I
would like to listen to people discount it as a theory, because I think it's as valid as some of the other theories about they've actually lived in the forest for centuries, but we don't go there very often, but we've never found a carcass, which seems very strange.
Yeah,
paleontologists find carcasses of every living thing, but not of these features, and I think it's because of the nature of their materialization or incarnation. Sorry, you were going to ask me a different question.
That's okay. Yeah, it's one I always ask everyone, which is, what strange things have happened to you in your life? Now, obviously, you've given me what most people would class as strange things happen to them. Is there anything else? It could just be a random person. What's weird things have happened to you?
I hesitate only because my life has been full of weirdness since about the age of 7 or 8. And I can give you all sorts of examples of different types of experience and phenomena. But I'm trying to just think what would be of most interest to your audience. Okay, a local strange experience. I'm going to have to keep the story to its absolute bare bones, otherwise I'll end up talking about it for too long.
Okay.
My wife was at a country house with a group of children, girl guides they were, and she phoned me, I was at home, to say that her fellow guide leader hadn't turned up. And I expressed concern, but what did she expect me to do about it? I can't go and take a girl guide weekend, you know. She said, oh no, just look up my phone book and phone this name. I'll keep the person's name out of it because I don't have permission to tell this story on this show. We'll call her Barbara. So my wife said, look up Barbara, and she gave me the second name. I phoned her up and say, are you stuck somewhere? Because it was snowing. And when I phoned Barbara, the phone was answered. The female said, oh yes, I'm so sorry. Bang, and the line went dead. I thought to myself, what does that mean? Does it mean that she's ill? Is she very upset? Maybe some trauma or crisis? Is she going to leave just late? Or is she actually very unwell and should I call an ambulance? Is she drunk? I mean, all sorts of things that's going on. So I phoned her up again. And this is how the conversation went. Barbara, is that you? Yes. Well, we're waiting for you. You know, my wife and all the guides are waiting. I'm so sorry. I can't do this. Bang, bang. It's a couple of bangs, and then the line went dead. So I thought, I can't phone my wife back with her 20 or so guides stuck in a country house in the snow and say, I don't know whether she's coming or not. She sounds as if she's dying. So I decided to phone the telephone operator. Okay?
Yeah.
Let's phone the number for the operator, told the operator the story without giving any names, just the story, the gist of the problem. And he said, I understand your wife's difficulty, but what do you expect me to do about it? And I said, well, you're much more experienced at speaking to people who are stressed and unwell. Why don't you connect me to her telephone number, but listen in with my permission. And when the telephone call finishes, probably very abruptly and very quickly, you can say to me, yeah, we'll call the ambulance or the cops, or, you know. So he agreed. He said, give me the person's name. And I gave him Barbara so-and-so. And there was a long pause. And he said, and the address, sounding quite severe and formal. And as I started to give him the address, he went, oh, come on. What kind of sick joke is this? And I said, I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about. I've been completely honest with you. He said, that woman's my mother-in-law. And I said, she lives about 40 miles away from you. I'm sitting here in Renfrewshire outside Glasgow. Where are you? He said, Paisley, which is nearer Glasgow. He said, how many operators are working this region in your office? He said, oh, 40, maybe 60. I said, so how come I got you? And he said, the woman you're looking for is my mother-in-law. She is not a young woman in her 30s who's involved with girl guides, but that is her daughter. And they do share the same name, and they do live at the same address. And he said, you've been speaking to my mother-in-law, who suffers from deafness, partial deafness, Parkinson's, doesn't normally answer the phone, but is always worried it's a member of the family. When she finds out it's not a member of the family, she doesn't try to talk with a broken voice, and the banging will be her trying to put the telephone down using her shaky hand. And I said, well, that explains pretty much everything, except where's her daughter? Because her daughter hasn't turned up at the address. It's a winter's night. She could be lying in a ditch somewhere in her car. And he said, I agree. I'll get 3 family members who have 4x4s or Land Rovers to go search. And I gave him the address she'd be heading for from Largs, where she stayed. And seconds after that phone call stopped, with me thinking, what an amazing coincidence. The telephone rings, and my wife said, you don't need to bother, Barbara's turned up. She was just delayed by the snow.
Yeah.
Well, you better put on the phone because there's a rescue just been launched for her. And we managed to laugh it off as something extraordinary thing. Now, here's my point. I believe, and I think I would be delighted if somebody could give me an alternative explanation, that I sent out a distress message to the universe saying, what is going to happen to my wife and to these children in this frozen location with no other adult? And the universe said, phone this guy.
Yeah, don't worry, sort of thing. Yeah.
And I phoned, and it was the complete change when he said, that's my mother-in-law you're talking about. What are the chances? 60 operators in another town, me at that point, and my wife at that point, and then Largs and knowing the story.
Yeah. I'm going to tell you a quick story now, Nick, on a very, very similar line, right? There's 3 weird things that's happened to me in my life, and I'd never really told these before, but I'm going to say it now because it's so pertinent in the coincidence category. It's probably 20, 30 years ago. I was at home asleep. Something woke me up in the morning at about 3 o'clock. Yeah, it might have been 2, but let's just say around that sort of early hours of the morning. And it told me to turn the TV on, right? That was what was in my head, turn the TV on. I turned it on. Literally, it came on. My name was on screen. And I've got an unusual surname. And when you try it with Paul, it was just the weirdest thing ever. Turn it on. There it is. This guy does this. It was like a job he did. I don't need to go into that, but what do you think about that?
I think if you're really skeptical, both our stories would be dismissed by skeptics as coincidences. Unusual, yeah, but it's in the nature of coincidence to have the odd rogue one so unbelievable you forget about the other 90,000 that are simpler to accept.
Yeah.
So that would be a skeptical point of view. But I think that, like a tapestry, where you think you can see the picture, but actually it's composed of links of thread or wool behind the scenes, jumping from one bit to another, that make the picture coherent. You don't understand. You think you see the pattern of reality, but actually there's links making up that experience of reality, of which we have little or no clue. That would be my thoughts. And can I just say something that's characterized our discussion? And it's probably my fault for not saying at the beginning. We use the word spirit a lot. I'm not sure that we should continue to do that. It's a kind of quasi pseudo-religious medieval picture of the world. I think we need to think about dimensions, planes of existence, interconnectedness on a cosmic scale, maybe other terms to suggest that consciousness has invisible or discarnate realities. Here's the problem that I have, and I see that we're going to run out of time. I think that there are beings, and it's not right to call them discarnate, because they can incarnate at will and step into our lives. I don't particularly take up a lot of your time by telling you about the Scole Experiments, Scole experiments in Norfolk in England, particularly popular in the 1990s. These were attempts to bring through deceased persons who were able to communicate physically. Now, just pause for a moment. I'm not talking here about clairvoyant mental images or little light flashes that can easily be fake. We're talking about someone coming up, taking your hand and shaking your hand, and you feel up and there's no body attached. Those kind of experiences. Seeing objects go into walls and through ceilings and not damaging them. And sometimes they come back, but not always. Speaking at length to spirit communicators, hugging small children when there were no children in the room or in the building. And they're having fun and they're running up and down. And, all of these kind of spiritualist type phenomena are just a glimpse of the fact that we know nothing about the nature of reality. We only know about our own little nest and cubbyhole. And I can be as guilty of that reductionist point of view, because I used to say to people, when they say we create our own reality, I say, okay, here's £100. Go stand in the motorway in a dark night and let's see how long you survive. Because when you see the truck coming towards you, I don't care how focused and enlightened you are. You're going to get flattened by reality. So I've been guilty of taking that attitude. But actually, I've been prevented from having lots of experiences because of an open skepticism about people's claims. And when I relaxed and simply went with the flow of the feelings of the group that was sharing a group intention, I've had experiences I'll take to the grave. Really spectacular things. And you'll need to come to the conference in Manchester to hear the details. But I never speak, almost never speak, about personal experiences where I'm the only person. I always try and talk about experiences where there's at least one witness, and for the things I've just described, over a dozen witnesses. So I could be a high-performing crazy, or keep the door of possibility slightly ajar, because it might be that I've had a glimpse of a greater reality, and I just don't understand it. And that's the challenge for all of us. When I was in Ontario a number of years ago now, I said to people, how many years of investigation are in this? It wasn't a room, it was an outdoor barbecue. And we counted more than 2 centuries of effort by paranormal investigators. What have you learned? Not what have you learned from books or from the media or from hearsay or other people's experiences. What have you learned as a result of your own experience, first-hand knowledge that you're confident you should pass on to your children on your deathbed? And one guy went to answer me immediately, and his wife stopped him and said, you read that in a book. And another guy went to speak, and his wife said, we watched that on telly. Nick is asking for, what have you gained from all these years of study? First hand, speaking from experience. 6 years later, I went back to that group, and some of them recognised me and said, there's that Scotsman that caused all the trouble by asking that question. We've got your answer. What you should tell your children on your deathbed is that there's more. No, sorry. What you should say is love is all there is. And it underpins everything. And I said, that's a really good answer, and it's one that I can accept. But it's not mine. My answer is this. And this is what I want to share with your audience. After 3 decades of paranormal investigations and experiences, there is more to life than you can measure. So go find it, because it does exist.
Yeah. And a wonderful sentiment. Essentially, live. Yeah.
So here's something else that I was given by Spirit the words, not the easel. I'm trying to see if I can get.
There's remember well, where you come from, and to where you will return.
I was given this over 2 seances, spread about a week or 2 apart. And the first person that came through said, I want you to remember something, and I want you to remember it well. And then you went away. I was very frustrated. So the next seance...
I bet you would be.
Yeah, the next seance I said, oi, can the guy come back that said remember well and tell me what to remember? And just like that, he said, where you came from and to where you will return. That should be the guide to the life you lead.
Right. We are now entering the Koit zone.
Koit zone!
So, Nick, these are random questions. You can give us a little information as you want or as much information as you want. So let's start. Can you play an instrument?
No. Almost certainly not. I'm a 2-finger typist, and that applies to the piano.
Okay, what's the grossest thing you've ever eaten?
Eyeballs.
An eyeball?
Yeah, in Africa. Snails. And probably the grossest would have been a desert grub. Basically a large maggot that tasted sandy when you chewed on it, as if it was grains of sand.
So you got a nice exfoliation at the same time as the lovely taste.
Yeah.
What's the crappiest bit of clothing you own?
I don't know. I've given away all my crappy clothing because my wife ensures that my wardrobe is not overfull of rubbish. So I would find that really difficult. I've got things like a Santa tie, with comic characters and Winnie the Pooh on it and stuff, novelty ties. But I don't know if they're crappy so much as just I like them. I think Winnie the Pooh is very unappreciated for his wisdom. Yeah.
He is indeed. A lovely little fella. Okay, that's cool. Favorite ice cream flavor?
Probably vanilla ice cream with a raspberry ripple running through it, which is quite popular in Scotland.
Excellent. This can apply now or probably when you were a lad. Slides or swings?
I like both, but I felt safer on a swing because I always worried that there was a tiny little bit sticking up in the slide and I'd get ripped from top to bottom.
That makes you wince.
Yeah.
What part of you doesn't work that well?
All of me. My bones are almost 68 years of age, and they let me down in all sorts of little ways. And I've got diabetes, type 2 diabetes, but it's beginning to kind of show itself in all sorts of small ways. Cumulatively, I feel my age. And if you'd said that question to me 10 years ago, I would say I didn't feel my age. In fact, some friends of mine would say, but you don't act your age. You might feel your age, but you don't act your age. You're still quite young at heart.
Exactly. I think that's how it's a good moral for everyone to live by, or a good ethics, should I say. Don't act your age. Have fun. Which TV show are you currently binging, if you are?
Very currently, up until 2 nights ago, The Lincoln Lawyer, which is a Netflix kind of series. I think I've gone through 2 seasons, and the next episode, which hasn't been broadcast yet, is on the 3rd of August. Prior to The Lincoln Lawyer, I was more of a movie buff than a TV buff. I've got movies that I love, and I've managed in my life to work in the movie industry. And
have you really?
And for film and television. It's been fascinating for me to see how movies are made, because it's far more complicated and involves much more preparation than I ever imagined sitting in the cinema.
Is there a movie set that you've been on that we would know?
I've always worked as a driver, yeah, but not a stunt driver. I'm not specially trained, and I'm certainly not insured to destroy cars. But as a production crew driver, and occasionally appear on screen. I've worked with Charlie Sheen. I've worked with Gillian Anderson, known through the X-Files.
Yeah, cool.
Billy Connolly, Robert Duvall. Those are the names that kind of spring to mind.
I think Billy Connolly would be an amazing person to meet.
He's a comic genius and one of the funniest men that's given me pleasure and laughter, sometimes in very irreverent reasons. But he's the funniest man alive as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I'm on that train with you. I think he is amazing. In fact, we watched a film of his the other day. I can't even remember the name of it, but it's you would know the film. It's where he was a granddad and then he died on the beach. Do you know that one?
I'm not sure that I do.
Look it up. I think I got it on Netflix.
All right.
If I remember the name, I'll send it to you by email.
Is it a sad film?
Yes and no, but it's got the tinge of the joy after the sad.
Right, because I don't watch sad movies. If I know they get a sad ending, I won't watch them. There's so much sadness in the world. Why add to it in your free time? You know?
That's a good thought. A final question in the Koit Zone. If you could click your fingers and erase one style of music from ever existing, A, would you? And B, what would it be?
It would be heavy metal with all sorts of satanic, evil, dark images. And it's because of the impact it has on people and how they then dress and speak and think and make judgments about the world. So I would get rid of that. It never did anything for me. I don't fancy spending my leisure time listening to a bat out of hell. You
know. Fair enough. I didn't expect that answer, but I kind of like it. And we are now coming out of the Koit Zone. So final question before we tie this up. What else do you like to do in your downtime away from all the other from work stuff you do? Any guilty pleasures or activities?
That I can tell you about? I'm semi-retired, so I still work for roughly 40-50% of my time. I'm a bit of a movie buff and I still enjoy movies, although normally I'm streaming them now rather than going to the cinema. I used to be part of the shooting and fishing brigade. I used to run a company that shot animals for sport. And can I tell you very quickly why I...
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So I was handed the company, having been an assistant to the managing director. And it was a small company in Scotland. We brought clients from all over the world to shoot grouse and all sorts of ground game and pheasants and so on. And when he gave me the company, it was beginning to turn the tide. You know, it was losing money a little bit. It was just profit margins. And one day I was walking through a town with one or two acquaintances, and a little old woman went to walk past me on the pavement or the sidewalk, and she looked startled at my shoulder, and I thought, does she know me? I'm not well known. And then she looked at my shoulder and said, "You've got a pheasant on your shoulder. How unusual." She said, "I've only ever seen a parrot on someone's shoulder, but you've got a pheasant." And then she looked and you could see her head darting. She said, "You've got pheasants running all around your feet. Surprised you don't trip up." She said, "You must have an interest in wildlife." And I'm thinking, yeah, I put down a few thousand birds and I've killed about 50% of them. I didn't say that. That was what I thought. And I just went, "Yeah, you could say that." And she went, no, son, it's either yes or no." And she looked over her left shoulder and there was nobody there. And she went, all right, I'll tell him, don't you worry. And as she went to walk past me, she leant over and whispered, "Spirit are saying, see, the next time you want to shoot them, son, use a camera. And she walked on. I never fired a shot after that day. And I did begin to think in the background, it's probably a good time to get out if it's not making so much money.
Oh, yeah.
But more than that, I felt increasingly uncomfortable with taking wild animals, just for sport.
Sport, yeah.
Yeah.
And when that message was given to you, what was the instant? Was it a shock? Was it an embarrassment? A shame? What was it?
I thought, does she know me? Has she got an opinion about blood sports and she's singling me out or whatever? But no, I think she didn't know me. I think Spirit were saying, we've got to stop this guy. This isn't good for anybody. And they got someone who could hear Spirit to stop me in the street and say, this is what Spirit want you to know. And I took advantage of it, and I stopped. I also was a fisherman, angling.
Mm-hmm.
And I've almost stopped that as well. Now I would only fish if I was going to eat what I catch, and I haven't fished for about 3 or 4 years. So these are things that I used to do for leisure that I don't do anymore. I used to have a gun dog, and I used to train it to high standards. I retired the dog, I've done shamanic rituals to try and get peace with Mother Earth, as it were, to try and undo all that bad karma that I've built up. I'm not sure I believe in it, but hey, I'm going to hedge my bets, and I've been through the rituals, and I now financially support wildlife charities.
Fair play to you. I've got just a couple of things. I know that's relating to ayahuasca because I've read that you've at least looked into it. I had one of those experiences. Maybe that's for another time if we get the chance. But after that woman spoke to you, gave you that message, have you had another message since from anywhere that said, thanks for listening, or well done, you made the right choice, that sort of thing?
No, just a feeling of rightness.
Yeah.
So when I go back to that area, which is very unusual for me, I feel sad, and I feel down, and I feel this is a memory of a bad time in my life when I didn't seem to show good judgment. Just because there was money involved. I think I was young and stupid and wanting to make a lot of money. And I didn't, but I think that was my motivation. But also a feeling of rightness. In other words, when I'm with wildlife now in the outdoors, I'm very pleased to be able to share the same space with them.
Yeah, that's lovely. Last question before we literally wrap this up. What are you currently working on? Is there a book in progress, or is it your conferences? What are you actively doing?
I do have a book in progress, but I don't think it will be out this year. What I normally say to people is, why should I write a book? What's the motivation? Do I want to have Nick Kyle across the front cover and knows something about the nature of reality? No. People are interested, they'll ask me. And I've only done about, 3, 4, 5, 4 or 5 podcasts. I've contributed to other people's books, and I've proofread or edited people's books. But that's just because I'm an ex-English teacher and it's easy for me. I don't particularly like the idea of publicity because it always brings with it trouble. I mean, for example, you might not be going to cause me trouble, but somebody out there will probably send me an email criticising what I've said or trying to make me feel bad about something. And the more your name builds up, the more of an issue it is for ego, and sometimes money comes into it, and jealousy for sure. And I've seen character assassination from friends of mine towards others, or rather friends of mine have suffered from character assassination from others. That's what I meant to say. So I wouldn't particularly want to go down that road. But I'm writing an article just now for tomorrow for a magazine, and it's only because someone contacted me and asked. I've no desire to go further than that. I will, if television asked me to appear on the screen as opposed to work behind the screen, I would certainly consider it, but I have no wish to seek it out.
That's lovely. Look, we'll end there. Nick, thanks ever so much for these wonderful conversations we've had over a few days. It's been great having you on, and it really has been mind-blowing, and I say that with all sincerity.
Well, thanks for inviting me, and maybe we can chat some other time.
That's perfect. Thanks, Nick.
Okay.
To watch other episodes of KoitCast, or indeed animations I've made, click the image top middle. Click the image top left to download some of my songs, and click the image top right to subscribe to my channel. And make sure you tick that notification bell so you never miss an upload.